The four horsemen of the apocalypse are already here, you just didn't notice. In the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, four riders gallop forth from a broken seal, unleashing terror upon the world. But they were never just fantasy. For over 2,000 years, the four horsemen of the apocalypse have haunted human history. And what if we told you they're still riding? Today, we explore the facts behind the legend and the terrifying truth that they may have never left. Nearly everyone wants to know what the future holds, yet most believe that no one can accurately predict the future. Amazingly, key biblical prophecies about a mysterious first horseman of the apocalypse, Revelation 6:2, provide important insights into history and reveal where current events are heading. The Bible's ancient prophecies are coming alive today and will surprise a world that has lost sight of the real God of the Bible. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ explained that a series of recognizable events, false prophets and religious deception, wars and rumors of wars, famines and natural calamities, such as earthquakes and disease epidemics, would precede his second coming. He warned his disciples to watch for these signs, because an unsuspecting world will be surprised by swiftly escalating events in the last days. One of these signs is depicted by the mysterious first horseman of the apocalypse, seen by the Apostle John in vision, which echoes Christ's warning that false teachers will come preaching another Jesus and a different gospel, a warning repeated by the Apostle Paul. So who was the first mysterious rider Christ or Antichrist? Bible students recognize that the four horsemen of the apocalypse symbolize end-time events preceding Christ's return. Yet controversy exists over the identity of the first horseman, who rides a white horse. Some mistakenly say that the rider represents Jesus Christ preaching the gospel because of his apparent similarity to Christ on a white horse as described in Revelation 19:11 through 14. Others believe that the first horseman represents the Antichrist, who will oppose Christ at his return. The Bible, of course, provides its own explanation. The sequence of end-time events outlined in Matthew, Mark, and Luke parallels the events pictured by the four horsemen of Revelation 6. In each of these Gospels, the initial event of the end-time sequence is a growing prevalence of false teachers and religious deception. This means that the first horseman is not Jesus Christ, but instead personifies a powerful false religious movement. The crown of this rider, a symbol of leadership and authority, suggests a prominent religious leader. Revelation 6:2. He carries a bow for shooting arrows, in contrast to Christ in Revelation 19:11-15, who is pictured with a sword and a rod of iron. Ephesians 6:16 pictures Satan shooting arrows or darts at true Christians, thus suggesting that the first horseman is in league with Satan. We should be sobered upon reading that the first horseman went out conquering and to conquer. Revelation 6:2. This points to the rise of a militant form of false Christianity just before Jesus Christ's return. This fits the end-time scenario that places the Great Tribulation, a time when true Christians will be persecuted, just after the events pictured by the four horsemen. But how does the mysterious first horseman provide insights into history, explain the direction of current events, and reveal the future? The prophet Daniel wrote of a horn associated with a Roman system that would change times and law, Daniel 7:21-25. The Bible shows that Jesus, his disciples, and the early church kept the Sabbath and the biblical holy days. By contrast, history records that the Roman Church forbade observance of the biblical Passover, and at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, mandated the observance of Easter. The Roman Church also outlawed observance of the biblical Sabbath, and at the Council of Laodicea in 363 AD, enshrined Sunday as its day of worship. The Roman Church adopted pagan celebrations of December 25th to commemorate Christ's birth, supposedly to make it easier for pagans to convert to Christianity. Through such changes, the teachings of early Christianity were corrupted by paganism, thus fulfilling prophecies given by Daniel, Jesus, and Paul. Daniel prophesied that the horn of the Fourth Empire, Rome, would preside over future revivals of that empire, Daniel 7:7-8-24, war against the saints, and prevail against them until Christ's return, Daniel 7:21-22, Yirbateindu. These revivals link the horn to the militant form of corrupt Christianity that will arise at the end of the age, and to a politically active church, the great harlot, who rides the beast, composed of 10 kings, and with whom worldly rulers have had intimate relations, Revelation 17. Church history leaves little doubt as to which institution has fulfilled this role. The pontiffs of Rome have presided over several revivals of the Roman Empire. During the Middle Ages, the papacy called for crusades to destroy enemies of that dominant church. Those enemies included not only Muslim infidels, but also many who professed belief in Christ and the God of the Bible, including members of the Eastern Orthodox Church who perished in the sack of Constantinople, many Jews, Sabbath-keeping Cathars, and Albigensians in southern France, and Waldensians in northern Italy and Germany. Those who followed the teachings of Jesus Christ, the apostles, and the early church were labeled heretics and were slaughtered over the centuries because they would not follow the decrees of the Roman Church. From the historical perspective, the history of the first horseman shows completely different colors. How will Antichrist call itself? Warning them not to think that the end is imminent when certain events happen, he said, "Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and will deceive many." Claiming the identity of the true Messiah, they deceive by promising to do what only he can do in resolving all human problems. But do such false messiahs literally have to say, "I am Jesus"? Do they have to have a primarily religious message? In Mark's parallel gospel account, the same deceivers claim, "I am he," Mark 13:6. Another way of saying it might be, "I'm the chosen one." Such people present themselves as the only ones with the answers. And clearly, it can only be that considerable time passes while the many deceivers rise and fall. The coming of someone claiming to be a Messiah is not the sign that informs disciples of Christ's return. A false Messiah is one who counterfeits the future role of the true returning Christ, who will in reality bring an end to all of humanity's ills. But of course, a counterfeit is not easy to spot. It's so close that it could be the real thing, except to the trained eye. So Jesus warned against being deceived by human beings who claim to be specially chosen by God to lead. More often than not, a false Messiah will combine aspects of religion and politics in an effort to become the anointed one. Take the 4th century Roman Emperor Constantine, the man credited with Christianizing the Roman Empire. Though he was baptized only shortly before his death in 337, he claimed to have had a special revelation of Christ 25 years earlier. Along with his 98,000-man army, in 312 he is said to have seen a cross-shaped trophy formed from light and a text attached to it which said, "By this conquer." Eusebius, Life of Constantine 1.28. Many years later, the emperor told the historian and bishop Eusebius that the next night Christ appeared to him and ordered him to put the sign of the cross on his battle standards. It would be claimed that this led to the victory that eventually made him the sole emperor. On the surface, Constantine may well appear to be the fulfillment of the White Horseman as victorious Christianity, but in fact he was the dubious champion of a counterfeit religion, and he himself a false Messiah. It was apparently to his political advantage to promote the faith. This brought about his role in the famous Council of Nicaea, set up to resolve theological divisions in the Roman Catholic Church. Yet despite his apparent support of the religion, within a short time he was involved in the executions of his wife Fausta, his son Crispus, and his nephew Licinianus. This is hardly the behavior of a follower of Christ. He already viewed himself as Christ's agent on the earth, but toward the end of his life, religious megalomania seems to have overtaken him as he named himself equal of the apostles. Other, more recent examples of the false messiah include Napoleon, Stalin, and Hitler. All of them took advantage of the language of religion and its imagery, stirring up religious fervor, and got their followers to virtually worship them because they seemed to have all the answers. Of course, they failed precisely because they were false. They also brought great destruction on the world, including on their own people. Millions died because of their violent regimes, their purges, and their wars. And that's what comes next in the sequence of the four riders. According to Jesus, war would be the second condition to plague the earth. He warned, "Take heed that no one deceives you," and then added, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Matthew 24:4, 6-7a. This explains the symbolism of the second horse and its rider. When he opened the second seal, another horse, fiery red, went out, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. And there was given to him a great sword. Revelation 6:3-4. But once again, Jesus stressed that conflict and war do not necessarily signal the end of this era. War has characterized humanity since the beginning of civilization. Jesus said that it would continue to be so until the end. It frequently follows in the wake of the false messiah because it is a natural consequence of false claims, wrong ideas, misguided policies, and ruinous ideologies. War is also the result of blind obedience to leaders filled with egocentric ambitions. The candidates for the second horseman, Napoleon Bonaparte, was primarily a warrior, while an obvious example and incarnation of the first rider, often depicted riding a white horse, wearing a laurel wreath, or robed as a Roman emperor, his leadership also brought the red horse at full gallop onto the world scene. Between 1792 and 1815, Napoleon's France was at war with four other colonial powers: the Spanish, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the British. His aggression took his forces around the globe. Like so many before him, Napoleon positioned himself as a savior, but it's estimated that between 3 and 6.5 million people died in his wars. Joseph Stalin's 20th century record was certainly worse. Violence and war, domestic and international, characterized his Soviet regime. A former seminary student, his cynical manipulation of religious sentiment underscored the duplicity of what in pure numbers was arguably one of the most murderous governments in human history. We could talk in detail about the warfare and violence of other false messiahs of the 20th and 21st centuries, including Mussolini and Mao, Cambodia's Pol Pot, and the Kim dynasty of North Korea. The story would be the same: totalitarian cruelty, wrongful imprisonment, and the brutal death of millions. The Red Horseman often rides in the wake of the false messiah. False Christs bring on total war. By explaining these two conditions, Jesus was also inviting his disciples and us to recognize that human beings have certain tendencies. Like sheep, they follow false messiahs down the path of deception, and they are inclined to accept the inevitability of war. Human nature is also implicated in the Red Horseman's ride. Military historian Victor Davis Hanson notes, "Conflict will remain the familiar father of us all, as long as human nature stays constant and unchanging over time, and across space and cultures." The Greek word John uses for red is puros or pyros, meaning the color of fire. Compare our words pyre, pyromania, pyrosis. This is not the normal Greek word for red, erythros, but a more specialized term that suggests fierceness or flickering reds, oranges, and yellows like a flame. It is the same word that John uses to describe the redness of the dragon, Satan, in Revelation 12:3. The third and only other occurrence is in a proper name, Sopatros Puru, which is strangely not fully translated in Acts 24. This particular color intimates heat and ferocity, like an out-of-control wildfire. The Hebrew language does not have a similar biblical term. However, the color red or scarlet in the Old Testament frequently symbolizes blood, whether the blood of sacrifice or the blood of violence. Scarlet has two other interesting meanings, that of wealth and luxury and of sin. One could make a case that all these meanings could apply to the second seal. The horseman's great sword is a translation of Machaira Megali. Again, this is not the ordinary sword of war, rhomphaia, but a short sword or long knife like a dagger. Frequently, Machaira is the knife used to prepare a sacrifice or to slaughter an animal for food. It is also the sword worn by magistrates and executioners. That the red horseman's sword is great, Megali, means either that it is larger or longer than usual, or that it is highly effective in doing its job. Surprisingly, rhomphaia appears in Revelation 6:8, and power was given to the four horsemen to kill with sword, with hunger, with death. A great sword, then, is the equivalent of a thoroughly effective instrument of death. The sword is often a symbol of God's judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness, and with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Even to his own people, if they do not obey him, God promises, I will bring a sword against you that will execute the vengeance of my covenant. Leviticus 26:25. Like this horseman, the sword of the Lord shall devour from one end of the land to the other end of the land. No flesh shall have peace. Jeremiah 12:12. Clearly, the purpose of the great sword given to the rider of the red horse is to inflict violent death on masses of people in divine judgment. Wars and rumors of them. As if there never was any intent to obscure the meaning of this figure, John's description of the red horse says matter-of-factly, and it was granted to the one who sat on it to take peace from the earth, and that people should kill one another. Revelation 6:4. This second seal plainly represents conflict, war, destruction, and bloody death. His comments specify wars between nations and kingdoms, but John's description in Revelation 6 expands this out to people, killing one another. This suggests that this horseman not only deals in mass destruction in civil, border, and world wars, but also in smaller conflicts down to individual murders. Thus, the second seal also covers rising violent crime, gang activity, mob hits, assassinations, family feuds of the Hatfield-McCoy. The Hatfield-McCoy feud involved two American families of the West Virginia-Kentucky area along the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy River from 1863 to 1891, variety and personal disputes that turn violent. Jesus really means that we will hear the noise of war with our own ears, and we will also hear reports of wars occurring elsewhere. In other words, wars will be taking place all over the world. Relentless aggression. It is interesting to note that the second seal is introduced by the second living creature saying, "Come and see." Revelation 6:3. Revelation 4:7 gives us the order of the living creatures as lion, calf, man, and eagle. So the living creature that introduces the seal of war is probably the calf. Just as the first seal's introduction by the lion presages the white horseman's prime characteristic of ferocious pursuit of prey, so does the calf foretell the red horseman's main trait. The red horseman, with its fiery red horse, great sword, and relentless aggression, is a fearsome symbol of unremitting, intensifying, uncontrolled, horrific conflict. God intends this figure to instill terror in mankind in the hope that he will repent of his enmity and be saved from its destruction and death. Sudden destruction. The world nowadays is not a safe place. Conflict in hot wars, violent crimes, or personal disputes can break out in an instant. In the context of the end time, as terrifying as he is, the Red Rider is followed by another lethal horseman, one whose job is to take care of those who survive his brother's bloody onslaught. Warnings about famine may sound absurd to affluent, overfed nations in Western Europe, North America, and other First World regions where obesity is a growing problem. Yet large segments of the human family suffer daily hunger and starvation as agonizing facts of life. While many religious leaders talk about love, peace, and tolerance, they fail to see or to understand the significance of tragic events that were prophesied long ago and are coming alive today. Jesus foretold that, shortly before his prophesied second coming, the world would experience increasingly severe famines on a global scale. The Apostle John symbolized these global famines with the third horseman of the apocalypse, a rider on a black horse carrying a balance scale, an instrument for measuring wheat and other grains for sale. According to Bible prophecy, famines, along with disease, natural disasters, and deadly global warfare, will bring about the deaths of 1/4 of the world's population. To many modern ears, this may sound like morbid science fiction or the scare tactics of an alarmist. For many in the developed Western nations, food scarcity today is little more than a supply chain issue that means there is only one cut of meat in the supermarket display, or that there are 5 kinds of rice available instead of 10. And even to the extent there is a problem, few connect it with the words of Scripture. But the truth should sober us. Actual global conditions show that our world is beginning to resemble what the Bible has long foretold. For decades, Western relief agencies and the United Nations directed most of their food relief efforts toward famines across Africa. Yet in more recent years, food insecurity has spread to other regions. It is sobering to realize that biblical prophecy warns of severe food shortages developing in more affluent Western countries. Long ago, God told the rebellious house of Israel that 1/3 of you shall die of the pestilence and be consumed with famine in your midst, and 1/3 shall fall by the sword, war all around you, and I will scatter another 1/3 to all the winds. The lack of rain and ensuing drought will be major factors contributing to this dire situation. Widespread drought and lack of rain are not the only causes of modern famines. Severe or erratic weather related to climate phenomena such as El Niño or La Niña can bring torrential rains, freezes, and tornadoes that damage crops and create food shortages. Wars that drive farmers off the land reduce food production, disrupt distribution systems, and destroy stored food. Political opponents are often deprived of access to food supplies. Access to arable land has become a tool for political influence in some troubled countries, with favored parties or groups gaining access denied to opponents. Structural changes foisted on debtor nations by the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund also generate famine conditions in segments of society. Nations that are encouraged to grow cash crops for exports instead of raising food often become unable to feed themselves. The displacement of rural subsistence farmers by large corporations also sends many into poverty and starvation. While political and social battles continue over climate change, disputing whether recent climate extremes are just part of a natural cycle or have been worsened by mankind's poor stewardship over the planet, the costs of environmental deterioration are severe and must eventually be paid. Fish stocks in the world's oceans are in serious decline, devastated by modern factory fishing techniques. Meat is becoming more and more expensive to produce, leading to the burst of interest in plant-based replacements that are being pushed by environmentalists, as well as by the multinational corporations seeking to profit from the crisis. Misguided government policies, amplified by drought, have caused devastating famines in the past, and, as prophesied, they continue to do so today, with signs that famines will worsen. Ukraine in 1932-33 saw an estimated 5 million farmers die because of famine brought about by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's policy, of forced collectivization of farmlands, and how many Ukrainians may die even this year because of food disruptions brought about by Russia's invasion. An estimated 30 million Chinese starved for some of the same reasons during their nation's Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s. Though it is impossible to get a reliable figure from the tightly controlled state, some observers estimate that more than 3 million North Koreans died between 1994 and 1998 because of their government's draconian policies. So, we should not take it lightly that in our present day, the European Union wants to maintain central control of Europe's food supplies, agriculture, fisheries, food processing and distribution, which could have sobering consequences. Prophesied disaster ahead. When God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses prophesied that if they obeyed the laws of God, they would be blessed with rain in due season and abundant crops. But if they ignored the laws of God, he would break the pride of your power by making your heavens like iron and your earth like bronze, so that your land shall not yield its produce, and disease epidemics would afflict their flocks and herds. God also warned that, because of disobedience, you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it, and that God would cut off your supply of bread. God later warned the Israelites that, in addition to crop damage by drought and insects, you shall be only oppressed and plundered continually, and your flocks and herds will be violently taken away from before you and given to your enemies. A nation whom you have not known shall eat the fruit of your land. You shall be driven mad because of the sight which your eyes see. What God foretold is beginning to happen today, to Britain and to other modern descendants of Israel in Europe and South Africa, bringing to mind Ezekiel's prophetic warning, "When I send against them the terrible arrows of famine, and cut off your supply of food." God has warned his rebellious children, "I will heap disasters on them. They shall be wasted with hunger." The terrified prophecy of upcoming famine. For disobedience, the writings indicate that God says he would bring a nation from afar to besiege and blockade the cities. All the food stores would be forcibly taken. The resulting starvation would cause the social structure to unravel at a frightening speed. The results are horrifying to contemplate. You shall eat the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons and your daughters, in the siege and desperate straits in which your enemy shall distress you. The sensitive and very refined man among you will be hostile toward his brother, toward the wife of his bosom, and toward the rest of his children, whom he leaves behind, so that he will not give any of them the flesh of his children, whom he will eat, because he has nothing left in the siege. Famine-induced cannibalism is the lowest depth of depravity to which a nation can sink. Yet scenes like this have occurred in history, and God says they will happen again. Reading this in the light of today's reported tragedies is profoundly sobering, but such deeply distressing events inevitably occur when men and women become entrenched in their disobedience to God's laws. When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades' underworld was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Revelation 6, 7, 8. New American Standard Bible. The fourth and final horseman is named Death Thanatos, death known in Latin as Mors and in Greek as Thanatos Thanatos. Of all the riders, he is the only one to whom the text itself explicitly gives a name. Unlike the other three, he is not described as carrying a weapon or other object. Instead, he is followed by Hades, Greek, Hades, Hades, Latinized as Hades, which here refers not to the pagan god of death and his abode in Greek mythology, but simply to the place of the dead in the Greek language, and which is called Infernus, the underworld, a clipping of Infernus locus, the lower place in Latin. However, illustrations commonly depict him carrying a scythe swords or another implement. He is no different than typical portrayals of death and is the only horseman who doesn't appear to be a human. The color of Death's horse is written as pallidus in Latin and as chloros, Latinized as chlorus, in the original Koine Greek, which can mean either green, greenish-yellow, or pale, pallid, in both languages. The color is often translated as pale, though ashen, pale green, and yellowish green are other possible interpretations. The Greek word is the root of chlorophyll and chlorine. Based on the uses of the word in ancient Greek medical literature, several scholars suggest that the color reflects the sickly pallor of a corpse. In some modern artistic depictions, the horse is distinctly green. The verse beginning with, "They were given power over a fourth of the earth," is generally taken as referring to death and Hades, although some commentators see it as applying to all four horsemen. According to the Interpretatio Graeca, he is moros, Latinized as morus, literally fate or doom, personification, deity of impending doom. This fourth, pale horse was the personification of death, with Hades following him, jaws open and receiving the victims slain by death. Death's commission was to kill upon the Roman earth with all of the four judgments of God, with sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. The deadly pale and livid appearance displays a hue symptomatic of approaching empire dissolution. According to Edward Bishop Elliot, an era in Roman history commencing within about 15 years after the death of Severus Alexander in AD 235, strongly marks every point of this terrible emblem. Edward Gibbon speaks of a period from the celebration of the great secular games by the Emperor Philip to the death of Gallienus in AD 268 as the 20 years of shame and misfortune, of confusion and calamity, as a time when the ruined empire approached the last and fatal moment of its dissolution. Every instant of time in every province of the Roman world was afflicted by military tyrants and barbarous invaders, the sword from within and without. According to Eliot, famine, the inevitable consequence of carnage and oppression, which demolished the present crop as well as the hope of future harvests, produced the environment for an epidemic of diseases, the effects of scanty and unwholesome food. That furious plague, the plague of Cyprian, which raged from 250 to 265, continued without interruption in every province, city, and almost every family in the empire. During a portion of this time, 5,000 people died daily in Rome, and many towns that had escaped the attacks of barbarians were entirely depopulated. For a time in the late 260s, the strength of Aurelian crushed the enemies of Rome, yet after his assassination, a certain amount of them revived. While the Goths had been destroyed for almost a century and the empire reunited, the Sassanid Persians were uncowed in the east, and, during the following year, hosts of Central Asian Alani spread themselves over Pontus, Cappadocia, Cilicia, and Galatia, etching their course by the flames of cities and villages they pillaged. As for the wild beasts of the earth, according to Eliot, it is a well-known law of nature that they quickly occupy the scenes of waste and depopulation where the reign of man fails and the reign of beasts begins. After the reign of Gallienus and 20 or 30 years had passed, the multiplication of the animals had risen to such an extent in parts of the empire that they made it a crying evil. One notable point of apparent difference between the prophecy and history might seem to be expressly limited to the fourth part of the Roman earth. But in the history of the period, the devastation of the pale horse extended over all. The fourth seal prophecy seems to mark the malignant climax of the evils of the two preceding seals, to which no such limitation is attached. We've traced them through scripture and empire, through famine and flame. But today, you don't need to open Revelation to see them. They're embedded in headlines. Conquest rides as global tech giants harvest your data not to rule lands, but minds. War thunders across borders in Ukraine, fed by billion-dollar industries. Famine creeps in quietly in Yemen, Sudan, and climate-ravaged farms. Death lingers in overcrowded hospitals, poisoned skies, and digital despair. They never left. They simply changed form. So what was Revelation warning us about? Maybe not about the end of time, but about the consequences of systems we keep repeating. The Four Horsemen aren't prophecy, they're patterns, and unless we recognize them in history and in ourselves, they will ride again. Or worse, they never stopped. Subscribe for more untold history, myth, and modern meaning. And remember, every empire falls, but awareness survives.